Welcome to the deep dive. Today, we're diving into something really important, especially if you're interested in the Indian legal system or prepping for those UPSC exams.
Yeah, definitely a big one.
We're talking about the National Human Rights Commission of India.
The NHRC.
Exactly, the NHRC. It's one of those things that, everyone's heard of, but
But not everyone really
yeah,
understands.
like what does it actually do?
Right, we're going to break that down, how it works, its powers, its limitations, the whole deal.
We're going deep.
Deeper than just the textbook stuff.
We've got reports, analyses, even some firsthand accounts to really get into the NHRC's impact.
So think of this as your shortcut to really understanding the NHRC, not just memorizing facts for the exam, but like,
Getting how it functions in the real world.
exactly.
All right, so first off, the NHRC came about in 1993 under the Protection of Human Rights Act.
Right, and that act itself got updated in 2006.
Okay, but here's a key point.
Yeah.
It's not in the Constitution.
Yeah, it's a statutory body, meaning its powers are directly from that legislation.
So it's like vulnerable to political shifts.
Potentially, yeah. It's supposed to be independent, but its existence relies entirely on the government. It's meant to.
Oversee.
Exactly.
I can already see why this is such a key concept for UPSC, right? It's not just like dates and names.
It's about power dynamics, analyzing those.
Absolutely.
Mhm.
So what's the NHRC actually aiming for? What's their mission, so to speak?
Well, the Act lays out three main objectives.
Okay, hit me.
First, they want a robust system for dealing with human rights issues.
Makes sense.
Then, an independent body to investigate when public servants are accused of violations.
Checks and balances. Gotta have them.
And finally, they want to build on existing human rights work that's already being done.
So not just reacting to problems, but
Proactive too, ideally.
gotcha. Now, who are the people making all these decisions?
So it's a multi-member body. You've got a chairperson.
Has to be a retired Chief Justice of India.
You got it. And then four other members.
Ju-
Two can be judges from the Supreme Court or high courts, serving or retired.
Okay, but it can't just be legal expertise, right?
Right. The other two slots are for people with specific knowledge and experience in human rights.
So a blend of the legal and the social.
Exactly. You need both.
And to top it off, they have the chairs of four other national commissions
Minorities, scheduled castes, scheduled tribes, and women.
as ex officio members.
Huge point. It shows they're recognizing that human rights issues,
They overlap, they're connected.
intersectional. Yeah.
Yeah.
You need that diverse perspective.
This setup is fascinating, but it makes me wonder, given the Prime Minister and other political figures are involved in the appointment process, how can we be sure the NHRC can really act independently?
That is the million-dollar question. The Act does state that for a sitting Supreme Court or High Court Chief Justice to be appointed, there needs to be consultation with the Chief Justice of India.
Okay, another layer.
Right. But whether that guarantees true independence, well, that's debatable.
So we've got our team assembled. What can they actually do?
Their functions are pretty broad. They can conduct inquiries into alleged violations, intervene in court cases related to human rights, visit jails, detention centers, see what's happening,
Yeah.
review safeguards for human rights, and suggest improvements.
Keeping busy?
They also do research, advocate for change, spread awareness about human rights.
So many hats, many roles. But
Yeah.
here's what I'm wondering. If they find someone's rights have been violated, can they punish the people responsible? Or, get compensation for the victim? Do they have that kind of power?
That's the catch, and it's a big one. The NHRC's powers are largely recommendatory.
You mean?
They can't directly punish or award relief.
So they can investigate, write a report, say
Nope.
what should happen.
And the government can ignore them.
That doesn't sound very effective.
Hit the nail on the head. This is where the debate about the NHRC's effectiveness gets really interesting. One former member called the NHRC's authority moral rather than legal.
Moral authority, so not much teeth there.
Yeah. Well, the thinking is that while the government isn't legally obligated, it would look bad to just dismiss the findings of a supposedly independent body, especially if the public is watching.
So public pressure, media attention, that's where the real leverage is.
You got it. And that's where those annual reports they submit to the government and legislature come in. These reports detail everything: the cases, recommendations, and crucially, how the government responded.
Including any excuses for not accepting those recommendations.
Exactly. So for our UPSC folks, these reports are gold. They show you not just what the NHRC is doing, but how the government is reacting.
That's a peek behind the curtain of power, right?
You could say that. For anyone interested in human rights, these reports are essential reading.
But the NHRC can't just rely on reports and good vibes, can they?
True. They can also approach the Supreme Court or High Court for directions or orders. This legal route can be a powerful way to kind of indirectly enforce those recommendations.
So some legal backing, but ultimately, success depends on navigating the political landscape.
You got it.
Okay, so we've got origins, structure.
Hmm.
What about some concrete examples of issues the NHRC has tackled?
Let's do it. Something our listeners, especially those UPSC folks, would connect with.
Yeah, yeah.
Okay, think child marriage. The NHRC has been really vocal about better implementing the Child Marriage Restraint Act. They've done inquiries, recommendations, and worked hard to raise awareness about the harm it causes, particularly in communities where it's still prevalent.
Makes sense. What about another issue that shows their engagement with human rights violations in India?
Another one they've consistently highlighted is manual scavenging. It's illegal, but it still happens. The NHRC keeps drawing attention to how dehumanizing this work is, how it violates basic rights. They've pushed for rehabilitation programs and stricter enforcement of the laws against it.
And for those interested in criminal justice reform, I'm guessing the NHRC's work on custodial deaths is super relevant.
Absolutely. They've been actively investigating these cases, advocating for police reforms, and pushing for greater accountability within the system.
This is all really fascinating, but gotta ask, what about the armed forces? Do they fall under the NHRC's, scope?
That's a crucial point. The NHRC has a specific limitation when it comes to the armed forces.
Okay, I'm intrigued.
They can request reports from the government about human rights violations by the armed forces and make recommendations based on those reports, but they can't independently investigate those allegations.
That raises some questions about the balance of power here. The fact that the NHRC has limited reach when it comes to the armed forces,
It's telling, yeah. It brings up questions about how different institutions are scrutinized in a democracy. Definitely something to consider.
Okay, so we've covered origins, structure, key issues. But there's a big development we can't ignore.
The 2006 amendment, right?
Yep, the Protection of Human Rights Act got a makeover. And analyzing that impact is crucial for understanding the NHRC today.
For sure.
Let's dig into that after a short break. We'll be back with more insights on the National Human Rights Commission of India. Stay tuned.
We'll be right back. Welcome back. We're digging into the National Human Rights Commission of India. And before the break, we were about to get into that 2006 amendment.
Yeah, the one that shook things up a bit.
Exactly. It brought some big changes to how the NHRC is structured and how it works.
This amendment is like a favorite topic for UPSC questions. So
Oh, for sure.
let's break it down. One major change was the downsizing of the state human rights commissions.
Right. They went from 5 members to 3.
So smaller teams.
Yeah, on the surface, it might seem like just streamlining, making things more efficient.
Less bureaucracy.
But some critics argued that shrinking the commissions could actually reduce the diversity of viewpoints,
Like fewer perspectives represented.
Yeah, and that could potentially weaken them.
Interesting point. Efficiency doesn't always mean better outcomes, especially when we're talking about something as, nuanced as human rights.
Absolutely. It's a classic dilemma, right? Intended consequences versus actual
It's
consequences.
a very UPSC kind of dilemma.
Totally. So what else did the 2006 amendment change?
Lay it on me.
Another big one was boosting the investigative powers of both the national and the state human rights commissions.
Gave him more muscle.
Yeah. More resources, more authority to conduct really thorough investigations.
So did that translate to more effective enforcement of their recommendations? Did it give them more teeth?
That's the key question. It's one thing to have the power to investigate, but if those recommendations are still not legally binding...
Right, the government can still just ignore them.
Exactly. This is where you have to go beyond the textbooks, look at real cases, and ask, did the NHRC actually use these new powers to get more concrete results?
It's about analyzing real-world impact, not just memorizing the law.
Couldn't have said it better myself. And finally, the amendment allowed the NHRC to recommend compensation to victims during an inquiry.
Instead of waiting till the end.
Right. So faster potential relief, which could make a huge difference.
Okay, that sounds like a positive change, at least for the victims.
Definitely a win for them, but again, it comes back to enforcement. If the government doesn't comply with the recommendation, what recourse does the victim have?
Right, right. So we've talked about this moral authority the NHRC has. How would you explain what that looks like in action, practically speaking?
Okay, imagine the NHRC is like a respected advisor to a king. They can offer wise counsel, but it's ultimately the king, the government, who decides whether to actually listen.
Makes sense.
The NHRC's influence depends on how well they can persuade, how much public pressure they can rally, and whether they can use the courts strategically.
So it's not just legal power, it's about reputation, relationships with NGOs, the media, and making it politically expensive for the government to ignore them.
Exactly. And that's where public awareness is so important. The more people know about the NHRC, understand what they do, and hold them accountable.
The better they can do their job.
Precisely.
So what can everyday citizens actually do? How can we make sure the NHRC is doing its job, that their recommendations aren't just being filed away and forgotten?
Great question. First off, stay informed. Read those annual reports, even if it's just the summaries. Follow the news, see what they're up to. Pay attention to the issues you care about.
Knowledge is power.
But don't keep that knowledge to yourself. Talk about it with friends, family, colleagues. Raise awareness online. Support NGOs working on human rights. Volunteer, donate if you can.
Put those words into action.
And if you believe your rights have been violated, don't hesitate to reach out to the NHRC, file a complaint, make your voice heard.
They're a resource for everyone.
Exactly. It's not just some abstract thing, it's there to protect your rights.
This is why understanding the NHRC is so important, not just for, like, UPSC exams.
Right, it's for everyone.
It's about knowing your rights
Right.
and knowing what can be done to protect them.
It's about being an active, informed citizen, understanding how power works, and what we can do to hold those in power accountable.
This has been really insightful. I feel like we've only just scratched the surface, though. There's so much more to explore about the NHRC's impact, their wins, their losses.
We've laid the groundwork, but now it's time to really dive into the heart of it. How effective is the NHRC at actually creating change? What are some of the big cases they've been involved in? Where have they fallen short?
Those are the questions we'll tackle in the final part of our deep dive.
Stay with us.
All right, we're back, and we've been talking all about the National Human Rights Commission of India.
The NHRC, yeah.
Its purpose, its powers, and, all the hurdles it faces.
We've seen that it's kind of like a watchdog, but without any real teeth, right? It can investigate, bark loudly, issue those reports, make recommendations.
But at the end of the day, it relies on moral authority and public pressure to make things happen.
Exactly.
So the big question is, how effective is the NHRC at actually bringing about change? I mean, we know they've taken on some massive issues.
Child marriage, manual scavenging, custodial deaths.
Yeah, but have they really made a difference? Have they moved the needle?
That's where it gets, well, complicated. Measuring the impact of something like the NHRC, it's not always straightforward. It's not always a direct cause and effect thing, you know. Sometimes it's more about shifting the conversation, raising awareness, creating the conditions for change to happen, maybe not immediately, but down the line.
So not just about instant wins, but long-term, systemic change.
Exactly. And for our UPSC folks out there, this is key. When you're analyzing the NHRC, don't just look at whether their recommendations were implemented, think bigger picture.
Okay, I like that bigger picture. What do you mean?
Did they spark public debate? Lead to legal reforms? Empower communities to stand up for their rights?
It's about understanding the ripple effect, the indirect impact.
Exactly. Take bonded labor, for example. The NHRC has been pushing for the Bonded Labor System Abolition Act to be properly implemented for decades now.
Right.
And while bonded labor still exists, there are constant pressure, investigations, advocacy. It's definitely helped bring this issue into the light, pushed for stronger enforcement.
Like shining a spotlight on something some people would rather keep hidden.
Yeah, and sometimes just that spotlight is enough to create change.
But let's be real, the NHRC isn't perfect. They've been criticized, right, for how they've handled certain cases, limitations in dealing with powerful groups like the armed forces and, that whole thing about being dependent on the very government they're supposed to oversee.
Absolutely valid points. And this is where critical analysis is so important. For our UPSC folks, it's not enough to just know the facts about the NHRC. You need to assess, think about their strengths, their weaknesses, their successes, their failures, and form your own opinion about how effective they really are.
Don't just take things at face value.
Right. And for those of you not taking the UPSC, this kind of critical thinking is just as important. The NHRC, it's part of our democracy. It's there to protect our rights. So understanding how it works, what it can do, what it can't do, that's essential for every informed citizen.
So as we wrap up this deep dive, what's the key takeaway for our listeners? What do we want them to walk away with today?
I think the biggest thing is understanding that the NHRC is complex, right? It plays a vital role, but a challenging one in Indian society. It's not a magic solution, but it is a tool that can be used to fight for justice, to hold power accountable.
And that its effectiveness depends on us. on everyone.
Right. Staying informed, speaking out, supporting those organizations, fighting for human rights, and holding the NHRC itself accountable.
Well said. This deep dive is just the starting point. There's so much more to learn, to explore.
Absolutely. Check out the NHRC website, read those reports, follow the news, get involved in the conversation about human rights in India.
It's a conversation that needs to happen.
Yeah, the fight for justice, it's ongoing, and the NHRC can be a powerful ally in that fight.
But only if we, the citizens, choose to make it so.
Couldn't agree more.
Thanks for joining us on this deep dive. Until next time, stay curious, stay informed, and most importantly, stay engaged.
See you next time.